Welcome. Welcome everyone online. Welcome everyone in person. I say it every time, and every time it's true for me, that it is a treat to get to practice together. So it's very much a joy for me to see you taking care of your lives in this way, coming to practice Dhamma together. So this evening, as usual for a Tuesday, I'm going to begin with about a half an hour of guided meditation. And then I'll transition into the Dhamma talk, and we'll have hopefully usually some time for questions at the end. And for the guided meditation this evening, what I wanted to say, I want to tee this up a little bit, just share a little bit with you. So in order to do a meditation that dovetails with the talk, and the talk this evening is about equanimity. That is our topic for tonight, the seventh of the 7 factors of awakening. And don't worry if you weren't here for the other 6. We're just taking them one at a time. So, but in order to do a meditation that relates to what I'm going to share later, then we're going to do a meditation on the 6 sense fields. And what are the 6 sense fields? Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and thinking or cognizing or knowing is that last one, yeah? So you have the typical 5 sense fields, and you have the cognitive, the mind as a sense organ. And rather than go through them one by one, what I'm going to suggest tonight is something a little different than what I often offer on Wednesday mornings, mindfulness of body. Tonight, I would like us to we're going to do something called choiceless awareness. So after some guidance about how to find your meditation posture and your relaxation, then we'll move into this kind of knowing each thing as it comes into the field of awareness, and knowing it by which sense door it came in. So you can use the label or not. You can hear something and you can think hearing, or you can just hear something and know for yourself that that's coming in the door, the sense field of ear and hearing. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. And I'll be very curious to hear more about that after the Dhamma talk during the Q&A and comment section, if you'll want to share reflect on how it goes. And at this moment, then we can begin to settle into our meditation posture. I usually like to begin with a little bit of movement. Yep, so everybody please check to make sure you have muted your mics. And beginning to sense the weight of the body on your seat. Relaxing the belly and sensing the natural stability of the body. And from that steady base, allowing the spine to come into a comfortable alignment so that you're sitting upright. Softening the eyes and softening the mouth. Perhaps beginning to notice the breath, breathing the body. And just allowing it to have its natural rhythms. And then shifting to the choiceless awareness. Just noticing each thing as it comes to be known, aware of which sense door it's coming from. Staying with the present moment, noticing the contacts at the sense doors. Staying curious about present moment awareness. Touching, tasting, smelling, seeing, hearing, or thinking. observing the present moment, contacts at the sense doors, and perhaps noticing how fleeting they are. And in these last few moments of the meditation, just checking in to see whether there's any sense door that you haven't experienced during this meditation. Is there one that hasn't come forward? And now for something completely different, as the comics like to say. Going to go ahead and offer a Dhamma reflection for this evening. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Bhutang dhammang sanghang namasami. This evening, I want to give a talk about equanimity. So as I said earlier, we have been in a series of Dhamma talks about the 7 factors of awakening. And the 7 factors, just to name them, are sati. I'm going to give you the Pali and the English. Sometimes I just give you the English, but today we'll give you the Pali and the English in case that's helpful. So sati, or mindfulness. Dhamma vichara, which is investigation of principles or investigation of dhammas. And then virya is energy or effort. And piti, joy, you're stimulating joy. And passaddhi, which means tranquility or calm. and samadhi. So I spoke about samadhi last week. Samadhi, often translated as concentration, but I really like the translation of absorption. Absorption. And then finally this evening, upekkha. Upekkha is the Pali word for equanimity. So when the early Buddhist teachings speak about equanimity, what is meant is stability or steadiness. Sometimes it's said as unshakability, unshakable mind. In kind of colloquial language, you might think of it as feeling profoundly grounded. That's what we mean by equanimity. And it's the last of the 7 factors for a reason. And as I've been saying all along, one way to think about the factors is to think about them in terms of a sequential series of developments. And that's why we begin with mindfulness in order to actually be able to even attend to anything, and then work our way through various qualities of mind and body that are intended to help to bring a sense of balance. So one thing that comes up quite often, just hearing the list of the 7 factors and considering what equanimity might mean or how we might practice with that, is what's the difference between tranquility and equanimity? So we have these 2 factors that sound very similar, right? Tranquility, passaddhi, meaning calm, and equanimity, meaning steadiness. And what I want to suggest, and hopefully I'm going to say more about why this makes sense, is that tranquility is about stillness. It is about stillness of both the body and the mind. That's passaddhi. That's the step that comes, if you will, if you're thinking about the 7 factors in terms of sequential development, that is the step that comes before the absorption of the mind. You need to have a degree of stillness such that you can stay with whatever object you're going to attend to and allow that focus to develop. And in contrast to that, equanimity implies an ability to flow with it, to be with change, steadiness amidst change. It's not equanimity if it's just being with one thing. Equanimity implies a certain kind of steadiness or stability in the midst of activity. So meeting everything that comes into your life, being able to meet everything that comes into body and mind, and meet it in a way that you're not set off balance, that you're able to find your grounded response. So one thing that comes to mind for me about this is an example of this kind of equanimity in the midst of change is the first line of the Heart Sutra. So the Heart Sutra is actually a very revered Mahayana text from early Buddhism, around somewhere between 100 years before the Common Era and 100 years after the Common Era. You know, we have to allow for these big ranges of time when we go that far back into the history of humanity and of spirituality. But so the Heart Sutra is from that period of time, a few hundred years at least, several hundred years after the time of the historical Buddha. And the first line of the Heart Sutra is this. I would give you a translation by Kazuaki Tanahashi. He wrote a lovely book about the Heart Sutra. I happen to have it here. And he wrote it together with, I believe, with Joan Halifax, although he's the only one whose name is on the front. And it's a nice text because it talks a little bit about the history of the sutra. Talks a little bit about Xuanzang, very, very famous Chinese monk and pilgrim who went to India and studied the provenance of the Heart Sutra and the meaning of it and brought it back to China. And he also talks about the vocabulary in a lot of detail in that particular book. So if you want to study Heart Sutra, that's a good reference for you. So here's how he translates the first line. He says, Avalokiteshvara. So Avalokiteshvara is the embodiment of compassion. That's one way to think about it. The face that we put on the universal quality of compassion. She, he, they, it is a bodhisattva, an awakening being. And that is Avalokiteshvara right there. For those people who are in the room, we could show you all online later. Avalokiteshvara, the embodiment of compassion, who helps all to awaken, that's what it means to be a bodhisattva, moves in the deep course of realizing wisdom beyond wisdom. Or sometimes this little part of this phrase is translated like that, like Avalokiteshvara coursing in profound wisdom, coursing in the wisdom beyond wisdom, the deepest wisdom. Avalokiteshvara sees that all 5 streams of body, heart, and mind are without boundary and frees all from anguish. So what is it to move in the course of wisdom, or to course or to flow along with wisdom, along in wisdom? This is what equanimity asks of us, this practice of equanimity. And this is one way to think about this, is this phrase, equanimity with diversity. And I make that distinction because there, in early Buddhism, pre-Heart Sutra, the way that there are basically 3 forms of equanimity that are described. And this is one of them, this equanimity with diversity. So it requires us to develop a profound trust in our ability to meet the moment. And I would suggest that, as I said during the preamble to the meditation this evening, that you can experience that in sitting. You can begin to sit yourself down in a situation where you have, you could say, a limited amount of stimulation, and you can see whether you're willing and able to meet each thing as it comes. And you train yourself in that, meeting it again and again, meeting whatever it is that you find. Yeah. And perhaps you see that you're not able or you're not willing, but even seeing that is wise attention. It's a very important aspect of our practice as well. Right? Because if we're not willing to see those times when we are not able to do the practice that we intend, or we're not able to meet our lives, then that's called spiritual bypassing. That's called using your practice to avoid life. Right? So instead of that, the suggestion is to see what is actually possible or not possible, what you're willing or not willing to do on the cushion, and meet all of that again and again. Meet it each time and develop that profound trust that you can meet whatever is there, no matter how terrifying, no matter how blissful, no matter how boring, no matter how angry, whatever quality it happens to have. Right? In fact, you could say you could even develop the ability to meet death. That would also be something that you would have developed the ability to meet step by step what happens, knowing that that's where it's going. Knowing that this is not the moment of death, this is not the moment of death, and perhaps this next one will be the moment of death. This is also part of the practice. Developing this profound ability to meet it. So attending to each thing as best you can, also being careful not to overwhelm yourself. So this is another thing that often happens when people take up this ideal of equanimity. It's like, oh, well, I should be able to look at that traumatic experience that I had, even if I have a total meltdown. And the answer would be, well, maybe you don't need to force that. You could take it a little bit at a time. You could treat this as a process of development and cultivation. Somebody once said to me, they were talking about a situation in which they were experiencing a lot of symptoms of needing some help, needing perhaps some therapy. And I said that, and this person said, well, the practice should be able to take care of anything. And the answer is, well, yes, the practice can address anything that happens in your mind, but our personal practice might not be ready for that. It's like saying the Dharma, the library has all the information. Well, yes, the library has all the information, but you might not have all the information. So in the same way, the Dharma can meet all of it, and you might be developing your capacity for that. So don't try to force yourself. That's also very harmful. That's very unskillful, right? In fact, again, talking about examples, the Buddha himself, when he talks about his path of practice, he was compassionate enough to talk about all the times when he tried exactly that. He tried to force himself to wake up, right? He tried holding his breath. He tried starving. He tried any number of things that didn't work. And he was kind enough to tell us about that, to say, hey, don't do that. That's not helpful. Rather than what? Rather than just hiding that. Oh, yeah, no, I'm an awakened being now, and I don't have to tell you about how hard it was to get here. Okay. So just by hearing this kind of description, then the other thing that becomes clear is that equanimity is not indifference. Equanimity is not about tuning out. It's not about anything goes or anything is okay. It's not any of those things. It's not about I don't care. I don't care if I die, or I don't care if I have these scary thoughts in my head, or I don't care about the person next to me because I'm not supposed to be attached. All of those things are are distortions of the teaching of Dhamma. So indifference is actually the opposite of equanimity. It's not meeting, right? It's not meeting what's actually happening. So as you go through this process, perhaps, of learning how, experiencing that you're able to meet what happens in your body and mind to some degree or another, then there's another kind of equanimity that can develop. And this other kind of equanimity that can develop is described in the early Buddha suttas as one of the formless perceptions, so one of the very sort of subtle types of meditation, is also described as a Brahma vihara. It's described as one of the heavenly dwellings, one of these meditations that is extremely pleasant and vast. So some of you might know that equanimity is not only the last of the 7 factors of awakening, it's also the 4th of the 4 Brahma viharas. So the first one is metta, or loving kindness, and then there's karuna or compassion. And then there is mudita, empathetic joy. And then upekkha or equanimity is the fourth of the heavenly dwellings. So it's experienced as a vastness of mind, as a limitlessness of mind, is experienced as a mind that can encompass all things. So no matter what happens in that kind of mind, in the vast mind, it's a drop in the ocean. I think about there's a beautiful poem called The 10 Verses of Unfathomable Depth. It was written by a 10th century Chinese master named I'm forgetting his name, darn it. My teacher, Seke Haradaroshi, wrote a book about it. And he says in this poem, as a description of this experience, he says, like rain falling into the ocean. All experience like rain falling into the ocean. No resistance. No resistance. And that kind of equanimity is very hard to jump into. It might even sound kind of like spacey or something, right? If you're just in your regular everyday hop on the train and need to get to work state of mind. So that kind of equanimity is best if you can try to develop it with one of the other Brahma Viharas. So typically, if I were going to offer a meditation on equanimity, for example, I would offer one of the other Brahma Viharas first. I would offer the loving kindness or the compassion or the joy, empathetic joy first, as a way of opening the mind and having that pleasantness and that brightness start to develop before moving into the steadiness of equanimity, which is also something less effortful, you could say, than any of those other states. So it's hard to just jump right into that. But what happens is that seeing that, and so these two together, being able to see the equanimity with diversity and being able to also establish this vastness of mind, then you also see this second kind of equanimity develop, which is equanimity of unity, equanimity of oneness. And what does that mean? It means being able to see the principles, the universal principles being demonstrated in everything that comes into your mind. So just as I was saying in the meditation, you notice that things are fleeting. You notice the workings of impermanence in each and everything. Each and everything. You cannot hold on to a single breath or a single thought or a single moment of this body because it's slipping away. So you begin to see that ourselves and everything that we are coming into contact with, you can begin to see that as expression of universal principles. So there are three, not just impermanence. The other ones are the unreliability or dukkha, unsatisfactoriness, and then anatta, non-self. So that gets into this third kind, the third and final kind of equanimity that I want to talk about tonight. So having these experiences again and again, bringing the mind to be able to meet the diversity of experience time and time again, having the mind be able to observe the principles that are happening within, right there, within that, all those diverse experiences, seeing the universal aspects that are showing up there, then you can have insight. The insight begins to develop. And a specific kind of insight is called specific conditionality, or the insight that of the mechanics, if you will, that create what we see and what we experience. So you know that everything, and this is why we can speak about Dharma, that what's happening in your life, what's happening in others' lives is specific. We are each an individual, completely incomparable constellation of karmic events, physical and energetic things happening. We are each a completely unique, incomparable thing. And, however, we are also all universally expressing the principles. Both things must be true in order for it to make sense to talk about Dhamma. So you see the specific and you see the universal, and you see that the two are not separate. It's not even two sides of a coin. They are not separate. So that insight says, what does that insight say? That insight says, things must be this way. Not that they should be this way, or that it's good this way, or that it's bad this way, but rather that the conditions are here for things to be this way. And the principles are working as the principles always work. So things must be this way. And when you have that experience, you know that that's how it works. It's not personal. Everything you're experiencing is completely impersonal. So then, it's interesting, the Buddha brings this up in a sutta in the Middle Length Discourses. It's Majjhima Nikaya 137, for anybody who's curious, which is the analysis of the six sense fields. And that's why we did a meditation on the six sense fields. He brings this up in this sutta, and the beginning part of the sutta says, get to know the sense fields, and also begin to make this shift between relating to the world from a materialistic standpoint to relating to the world, this inner world as much as the outer world, relating to the world from the standpoint of the principles, and in particular, one principle, which is impermanence. So that's the theme that he's talking about. And he gets near the end of the sutta, and he talks about seeing these three kinds of equanimity develop. And the third kind is called Atammayata. Atammayata in Pali. It means, it is translated in different ways. Bhikkhu Bodhi likes to use non-identification. Non-identification. Or another way to think about it is Ajahn Amaro and Ajahn Pasano chose this non-fashioning, non-constructing. So it's unconstructed in the sense that you can't make a concept out of it. You can't make a sankhara out of it. So to turn it to the positive, so those are all negatives, right? Those are all negation statements. To try to turn it to a positive is saying that equanimity, the final kind of equanimity is realizing that things are ungraspable. Realizing the ungraspability of everything. This life and everything else. So there's no effort to try to resist that. There's no effort to try to create a fixed state. Again, going back to the first kind of equanimity, you can meet each thing, you meet each thing, you meet each thing. And you know that each thing is as it must be. And if you want it to be different, then you have to put in the conditions or hope that others or other things are putting in the conditions such that they change. And they will change, but the question is how. They change according to the conditions and the principles. Yeah? So that kind of ultimate equanimity is based on this final step of accepting that accepting that things cannot be grasped. It's in a way it kind of reminds me of like quantum physics. Like just accept the answer that we don't know where that little bit of matter is. We just don't know. And then we observe it and we say, okay, well, it's there because we observed it there. But then we have to know that if we stop observing it, then it's not necessarily there. That's what quantum physics is telling us, right? But this kind of unknowability, ungraspability, undefinability is absolutely happening even in the physical world. But again, to see this, to think about what is a practice that helps us approach this, it helps for us to meet what's present and to start to see the principles. So I'm going to tell you one story and then I'm going to wrap up my talk. So it's a story that some of you have heard, and I tell it again and again because I love it. And I think that it demonstrates a lot of Dharmic principles. It's a story from when my daughter was quite young. So we had a lovely Mother's Day, my daughter Kayla and I. Kayla's 33 now. But this is a story from when she was, I forget now, like maybe about 6 or 7 years old, 8 at the most. And we were moving, we had the great privilege, I should acknowledge the privilege that we were moving to a house that had a pool in the back, a little pool. And it was a great privilege. And we were in Florida at the time, and I wanted her to be safe. So I wanted to teach her how to float in the pool because if she fell in or something, I didn't want her to get hurt. I wanted to teach her how to float. So, okay. And I knew, but I had learned before I can even remember, I learned how to float and how to swim. My parents taught me I literally cannot remember. I've always known kind of thing. So it must have happened, when I was like a toddler or something. So I didn't know exactly how I was going to teach her, but we were going to get in the pool and I was going to teach her how to float. So, all right, we get in the pool and I'm holding Kayla up and she's kind of lying down more or less. And I'm kind of holding her up. And then I would lower my hands and then she would sink. And I would raise my hands again. And I'd say, okay, just relax. And I would lower my hands. No, she would be sinking again. And she would do this. She would be reaching out, right? This is attachment to the material world. She would be reaching out, trying to grab the water or like the side of the wall or whatever was going on, right? Which doesn't help. It's not actually how it works. But if you think about it, up until that point, what Kayla knew was if she threw a rock in the pool, the rock went to the bottom, right? And if you threw in a leaf, the leaf would float. So how does that work? She didn't really understand. So there we are. And it's not working. And I'm trying again and again, and it's not working. And so I thought about it for a bit. I thought, well, how is it that I do it exactly? So then I thought, okay, here's the key. The key is you have to lean your head back. You have to entrust yourself by leaning your head back into the water. And then that weight of the head is compensated by the air in your chest, actually, mostly, I think. This is my guess about the physics of how it works. So anyway, so I say, okay, boo. Just lean your head back. Just lean your head back and try to relax and so we tried a couple more times and she wasn't quite getting it, but it was like that. It was like she had to trust, right? She had to trust that she could lean her head back and it would be okay. And then finally one time she leaned back and I put my hands down And then, she was floating. She was floating right there in the pool. And the lesson of this story is that there was this principle, there is this natural principle that people can float. Somebody actually told me once that they can't float, and I don't know if that's actually true. I mean, they couldn't, and I don't know why, but most people can learn to float. And it's a natural principle of the water, this kind of buoyancy, right? But it was a principle that she'd never experienced up until that point. And then once she was able to trust in that, then she could see the principle, the general principle, like she could float, I could float. Like the fact that I could float wasn't some exception. That's actually like how it works. Her friends, didn't she start teaching her friends to float? This is typical of Kayla. She started trying to teach her friends, Alicia, to float. Later, that was years later. But you see the specifics of your own situation, right? Just like she did, the specifics of her own situation. And she had to try it out. And she had to put some trust in it. And she had to listen to the instructions. And she had to keep, right? And fiddle with it for a bit. But then eventually she could see both that it was specific to her and also that it was a natural principle that she just hadn't experienced up until that point. So just to bring it all the way back around, so the practice will show us again and again and again, if we are willing to meet what's here in this body and this mind and this world, the practice will show us how to develop equanimity right in the midst of the very specific activity of our lives. So thank you all for listening.